Welcome back. Governor Murphy likes to brag, and for good reason, about a state budget that has a $10 billion surplus. But a new report is out that warns that unless the state deals with its long-term systemic economic problems, those good times will not last. Here's my interview with Regina Egea, president of the Garden State Initiative, the group that put together that report. Regina, thanks so much for doing this. Your organization recently released a financial statement about the future of New Jersey, and you saw some underlying problems. Can you explain?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Larry. It really is a report that looks back at a 2012 report that identified many issues that we had fiscally in the state, and it really looks at updating that. And unfortunately, many of the problems that were true back in 2012 continue to be true today. And the reason we thought it was important to issue this report now is because that there are a lot of spending going on in the state that's being funded by one-time cash that has come into the state because of COVID relief. And the state has received over $9 billion in COVID relief. And it has escalated spending a tremendous amount, in fact, over $11 billion over the first term of Governor Murphy. And the concern we have is that instead of solving the problems that have been long lasting for our state, that we instead are spending on things that don't give us a sustainable future. Hence the title actually of the report, which is Toward a Fiscally Sustainable State. And we analyze and both offer some recommendations about how we could better use those funds to give us a longer term, brighter future.
Right, because things look really good right now. I mean, if you just look at it in a snapshot, there's a budget surplus, the Moody's rating went up, the first full payment of the pension plan was made in years. So what is the problem?
So a couple of things. One is to clarify, the Moody's rating was a change in outlook, not a change in rating. And they even talk about their concerns that these are non-recurring revenues that are funding some of those brighter, pictures that are being painted in the state. And back in the spring, there were others that were talking about a concern about a fiscal cliff, because the spending, the escalation spending is being funded by money that will no longer be true in about 2 years. And, we think that we ought to look at how do we build a structurally balanced budget. What that means is we only spend at the rate we bring in on a recurring basis. And we use these one-time cash to solve problems like unfunded pension liabilities and restructuring our pensions so that it's sustainable long-term, like many other states have done, like funding and modernizing the healthcare programs that we have for the public workforce. That needs to look much more like other states and the private sector. We could afford transitioning those employees to those future programs with some of this money instead of continuing to build liabilities that we don't know how to solve.
So does it give an outlook on when we'd run into problems again if we keep going down this path?
Oh, well, there's as I said, there's $9 billion that came into the state, and the escalated spending is about $11 billion. So we likely would see a tremendous, I'd say, crash in terms of needing more cash than we can afford in our budget in about 2 years. I mean, that is about how quickly it's going to show up. So it wouldn't be fiscal 22, won't be fiscal 23, it'd be immediately after that.
But you keep talking about the stimulus payment, but there was a borrowing of $4 billion too that is added on top of that. That will have to be paid.
Absolutely. In fact, it'll drive an additional $500 million in interest payments starting next year. I mean, the finances are being structured in a way that they push off and snowplow problems that have been talked about, by the way, by both parties, by many study commissions, including Path to Progress, as well as back in 2005, that Governor Murphy was part of a group that looked at this. These are longstanding problems, and they're not being solved. They're being papered over. I think specifically what I said, papered over by the cash that is enabling us to get through this budget and not confront what we have to confront.
Well, you certainly got underneath the skin of the Murphy administration. They released this statement saying the Garden State Initiative is simply a political organization which is led by Chris Christie's chief of staff. This report, which boils down to standard GOP talking points, fails to mention that many of the problems have come from the past.
All right.
What do you say to that?
Well, three things. One is these are not GOP talking points. These are longstanding. As I said, both parties have talked about it and recognize we need to solve it. Number two, the study was done by two incredibly experienced and credible individuals. Tom Healy, who worked at Goldman Sachs at the same time Governor Murphy did, as well as has run a development fund and was an assistant treasury in President Reagan's administration. The other author is Thad Calabrese, who's a finance professor at NYU. So these are independent individuals who have looked at the facts and have laid out the case for why these issues need to be resolved. And lastly, while yes, I was the chief of staff to a Republican governor, I'm also a 30-year business executive. And I am one that is trying to offer policies that really help the state think about what's a reasonable and possible future that could be better for New Jersey than it is today. So I guess as a closing comment, I'd also be interested to note that none of the facts in the report were commented on, just an attack on me, an attack on the Republican Party, which this organization is nonpartisan, and one that really didn't take much creativity to offer.
It doesn't sound like they're going to do it, though. It doesn't sound like they're going to take your suggestions.
Well, it would, it's not just the administration, though. I think the legislature has responsibility here as well, Larry, as you well know. And I think the legislature, who are also on the ballot, and unfortunately, I think that many of these issues that should be talked about now during the election season are being suffocated by other discussions. And it's unfortunate because I think that many of these legislators who will be in office and, beyond the next 2 years, they are the ones that are really going to be saddled with trying to solve this problem that in terms of false expectations and a rate of spending that will just not be sustainable.
The report is extensive, and obviously in just a few minutes, we can only touch on a couple of things. We actually probably only touched on the pension liability. Can people go somewhere to read it?
Of course, our website, it is posted, www.gardenstateinitiative.org. We also now do a podcast, GSI Briefing. I interviewed the two authors in our latest podcast, so individuals can go and listen to that. There's also a video of a press conference that we did just last week with Governor Kane, who spoke to all these issues, again, along with the authors, and that's also posted on our website. So it's gardenstateinitiative.org.
Thanks for your time. I really appreciate it, as always. Regina Egea, president of the Garden State Initiative. Next on Jersey Matters.
Up next on Jersey Matters, we'll introduce you to a young man who had a very special wish for his 12th birthday. Find out what it is coming up next on Jersey Matters.